coach, a consultant, a trainer, a speaker. I've been coming to Hamilton now for about 5 years, covering different topics in wellness and well-being, and in the science of positive psychology, which I'll tell you a little bit more about because it's really what all of this is rooted in. And today we're going to talk about the disease of busyness. It's something I made up that terminology. I actually started doing this talk about 6 years ago for Well Now Urgent Care at one of their conferences. And they said it's like at around 3 o'clock, people drop off. It's like a bus comes and drops off patients that can't get into their primary. And everyone's already frantic because they're living in this really busy mindset. But then it actually gets and people can't handle it. And I was like, yeah, it's like we all have this disease of busyness. And so I've kind of play on those words with causes, concerns, treatments, and looking at what we can do about it, how it affects us, and how we've kind of adapted busyness the way we think about it. And we already have a little bit about me, so I won't go into that too much. But also along with my practice, I also have a physical storefront called Northbound Mind and Body Shop. It's in Manoa, which is a little village in the east side of Syracuse. So if you're ever in Manoa, there we have product services and events all to support well-being. Sometimes they have in-person workshops or do things for organizations in the space, and also just making well-being more accessible to my community. And as I said, positive psychology is what my practice is rooted in. And if you're not really familiar with the science, I'd just like to give a little bit more background. Where traditional psychology's focus was really on looking at categorizing, diagnosing, and being able to treat mental illness, work with trauma, understand the human condition. But some of the methodologies and things that we were doing were absolutely needed, but possibly only getting people to a nurture point. If you're not depressed, it doesn't mean you're happy, it just means you're not depressed. If you're able to successfully treat an anxiety disorder, it doesn't mean you're feeling peaceful and serene, it just means you're not having acute clinical anxiety. And so the idea was, how do we move people north of neutral, which is where my term northbound came from, and why are we studying the people that are up here that are thriving and flourishing, and how do we diagnose and categorize their strengths? And so you can absolutely have support in a clinical mental illness, but also benefit from the tools of positive psychology. And so it's not a one or the other. It's very much we need both sides of this science. And so now, since the 1990s, we have a whole field of research looking at what are people doing that are thriving and flourishing, and how can we learn from that? How can we also learn tools for resilience so that we don't dip south of neutral? And so now there's a whole field of psychology called positive psychology. And I kind of looked at this as the dis-ease of being busy and feeling busy, and that in many ways, we've taken on busyness as an emotion. So I'm going to kind of dive into what that is. And so I kind of came up with this epidemiology, causes, concerns, and treatments, originally because I was doing this in a medical practice and for a conference for them. But I've done this in so many different arenas, and everybody seems to kind of agree that we're all experiencing this phenomenon as a society. And so I made up the definition because I made up this disease. So I say it's the feeling of overwhelm, stress, and unease provoked by feeling busy and rushed, leading to a myriad of negative social, emotional, physical, and mental consequences. And although I do look into some statistics and some research and some surveys on what people are feeling, I think we can see the epidemiology of this by anytime you've asked someone, and just think of this personally, actually by a show of hands, in the last month, have you asked somebody how they were doing, and they said something along the lines of good but busy? Yeah, every person here shook their head or raised their hand. It's almost as if we have taken on busyness as an emotion. So not how are you doing? I'm good, I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm mad. It's the how are you? I'm busy. And so we take it on as a feeling, and we can see this feeling and the contagion of this emotion as well. But there are some stats, and as I've done this throughout the years, I've always kind of check and see what else is out there. And it's usually somewhere between 60 to 80% of people saying they don't have enough time in the day to do what they need to do. this other newer one that I pulled up looks at people, 64% of them feeling too busy to even take care of their health or, you know, eat right or cook for themselves, do healthy activities. And another coaching firm that was looking into this question, they said the same thing when they said, how are you? 8 out of 10 people were saying busy. So this is not it's something I see everywhere. It's something I'm even teaching this. I say sometimes, I recognize it and I'll say, see, I too am feeling that same feeling. So I also created a little disease of busyness scale because I don't think the problem is necessarily being busy. And I don't think the problem is necessarily being overwhelmed. I think it's when we bring that together. And so if you think of busyness, you know, we look at the pandemic and I remember my calendar just slowly all these things dropping off until I had no requirements, maybe still some workplace stuff that I was doing remote sessions and things like that, but my kids' calendars, my social calendar, everything completely shut down. And we can see on the extreme of that, we don't want to be not busy at all. We want to have things that fuel us and make us happy. And the same thing is we don't want to be underwhelmed necessarily, or even apathetic, but we also don't want to be overwhelmed. And so kind of looking at, I think the sweet spot is somewhere probably in the middle of not being completely too busy and not being completely too overwhelmed, but that we want a little something, but we don't want these at the extremes. And I think people are feeling the push of that extreme end of the scale. So when I started looking into this, I was like, well, why are we so busy? What is happening? What's the phenomenon leading to everybody feeling busy? And the first thing, it quickly became from, why are we so busy to, are we actually so busy? Because when I started looking at the numbers, most of the studies said we're actually working less than we used to, and we actually have more free time than we used to, which I found shocking because it seems like we don't. And I'm not saying there aren't places where people aren't working multiple jobs to make ends meet, but I'm saying generally, as a working society, 9 to 5 kind of job, we are not working more than we used to. And actually our counterparts in the 80s were putting in more hours. So what is this phenomenon? And I think it comes down to a lot of factors contributing to each other are kind of combined. And I think even the awareness of this is its own remedy in some ways, because I think if you start to realize some of these factors, it really helps shift your mindset away from it. And so I'll go through some different things that I pulled together that I think really leads to this. And first is kind of the way that we've worked over time. Starting with when we worked in agrarian societies, we could only work when the sun was up. So we would go to work early when the sun set, and when it arose, and then when it set, we'd stop working because we couldn't see anymore. Then we moved more to the Industrial Revolution, but that was still a very much you punch in, you punch out with that time card, and we don't have this kind of extraneous work that we see now in the technological and data-driven revolution, where we continually always have more. There are more emails, there are more things to keep up in each of our industries. So I would guess everybody here does something different here. There's a specific more to whatever you do. So more studies or research to take in, more meetings, more Zooms. If we can't find you, you know, if you can't make it to the physical meeting, we can put you on Zoom and we can find you there. So I feel like it's a constant, infinite stream of more. But as humans, we are very finite beings. We only have so much energy. And we feel with all this data, with all this information, with all this stuff coming at us, that there is always more, the never ending inbox. How many of you get that inbox clean for like 5 minutes and you're like, I don't want to look again? Or do you just, what do you guys do? Do you just let it go? Yeah. Yeah. And there's like a whole school on inbox management, like the whole, yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of in the mix of where some days I'm like, I'm going to get on top of that inbox. And then other days I'm like, yeah, that's never going to happen. So also kind of that infinite feeling, which makes us feel busier and more overwhelmed. And also we kind of have this paradox of choice where we love choice. We don't want to be told you only have this, but we don't want too much choice. And nowadays there is limitless choice. You go in to buy a bottle of shampoo and it's like, it's full production, and then you might need conditioner, and then You know, there's just an unlimited amount of things again. So we want some choice, but too much choice is overwhelming. So adding that to the mix. On top of this, I'm going to keep kind of building this story. I think we also, because we can see everybody else's highlight reels and what everybody else is doing, and we have the internet, which tells us what everyone around the world is doing, we put this really high tyranny of expectation on ourselves that we can somehow balance all these things, because when people are posting things like, oh, wow, well, she, you know, my neighbor looks like she's giving back and her kids are doing great and she's going to work and she's like got her own hashtag and like all these things. And I'm thinking, and then she just ran a marathon last night. And how do I do that too? And I think we think that somehow there is this very achievable balance that we can actually do all of these things. And I'm not saying we can't have lots of these things mixed into our lives, but the fact that we think we can highly achieve in all of these because we see people's highlight reels, I think really makes it a little bit of this like unlimited expectations that we start to put on ourselves. And for those of us that have children or grandchildren, we can see that being passed on to them. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, sports had a season. Now sports go all year long, everything goes all year long. And so not only are we managing our own lives, we have become mini managers of these kids' lives. And so this tyranny of expectation getting passed down to the kids, and we were just talking earlier about your grandkids. Now, you know, it's like maybe you thought you got, you know, let one go, but you got a new one. So, yep, or a group of them. Okay, on top of this, so now we're just saying like this is like layered. We're constantly distracted. So text, things are buzzing and beeping. We were also just talking about how nice it was when we used to go to like the grocery store. So I know some of you may not have had this phenomenon in your life. I certainly did. When I was younger, or we didn't have cell phones. So we would go somewhere and I didn't have a distraction in my pocket. People couldn't access me at any given time. And now we've got text, email, social media. Someone might actually call you, maybe. Most of the time, maybe we don't answer that. But and what happens is we have continuous partial attention on everything. So we're trying to manage all these things, and things buzzing, and we've got our email going, and someone's coming and asking us a question, but we are so busy keeping up on all of it that we can't really keep up on anything at once. Here's some distraction numbers, and these are probably, I tried to update most of these slides. This one's from 2017. Typical mobile user checks their phone more than 150 times a day, with 67% checking their phone for messages or alerts, even when it's not alerting you. So how many times do you do that? Get on the phone, you do all the checking of all the things, just because you might have missed something. And the average office worker checks their email 30 times every hour. Whew. That's a lot of distraction. And really when we get into flow states, when we're engrossed in something, it takes about 7 minutes to get back into any type of flow state once we're distracted. So every time you check that email, every time your phone dings, we're continually pulled out of that rhythm of what we're doing and brought into that other thing that we're checking, even if it doesn't feel like it. And on top of this, our leisure, because we're busy, because we're overwhelmed, because we have distraction, a lot of the leisure that we're experiencing is not extremely restorative. So I don't know, you know, I know so many people that tell me, you know, at the end of the day, I'd love to go for a walk, but I'm so tired that I just scroll or I watch TV and I just don't have the energy to be able to do something that's restorative. And so a lot of just kind of passive leisure, and even the times when we are standing in line at the coffee shop, where our brains are supposed to have this downtime to kind of refresh, almost like turning off your computer and, you know, kind of group information and chunk it and kind of reset almost, we're still looking at something. So things are just coming in at us all the time. And that's what it's called, the default mode in our brain, where it allows us to kind of put memories into long-term, you know, like storage, be able to chunk information, be able to retrieve it better. And we're just not giving ourselves that time because we're bringing in more information. And I think a lot of people think busyness equates to success. And that's kind of a story that we've seen is, oh yeah, I'm so busy. I remember when I first had my kid, well, they had them separately, so I'm twins, but my first child, I was in this I had this group of moms, and every time we got together, it was like people were comparing who slept less, who was thrown up on more, who hadn't showered the longest. I was like, I don't want to be in this club. Like, I get it, you know, that we're overwhelmed, but that doesn't make us a good mom because we've sacrificed everything. But I do think people sometimes think, yeah, I got to do this and this and this, and it almost makes this sense of self-importance to us because that's what we've been told, that busyness equals some sort of success. But leisure actually used to equal success. If you got to go on vacation, it meant that you had a job where you had enough time and money to go travel and do something. And now it's, if we're busy, there's some sort of, you know, that it equals importance. Even research looking at people being perceived as more important when they work busier. So I do think collectively, did I miss anything of why we feel busy? Does anyone have anything they want to add to that? That makes them feel busy or overwhelmed? Does that resonate, those types of things kind of coming together? Yeah. All right, so I started out with kind of, you know, why are we feeling this way? But what are the concerns with this, living like this? There's many that we have. And the first thing I think is that we're just all kind of on a short fuse, especially in the workplace, when we're already, like I said, when I was doing this for urgent care, because they're already living in that space of the disease of busyness. When actual busyness arises, I think people have this fuse that's extremely short. So what do you think feeling short on time makes you feel short on? So anyone have anything that, what's that? Patience. Patience, yeah. What else? Energy, yeah. Anything else that when you feel short on time, you just don't have, you feel short on? I'll give one more for myself. I feel short on like creativity or the ability to just be present or get something out of the experience. I just feel short on anything that I have to give because it's just, I have to get to the next thing. So I think we have this short fuse that we're kind of working with, but it does have a myriad of effects in different areas. First, I'll talk about some of the effects on work. It puts us in this rushed, overwhelmed, and negative state. I'm not big on emotions being negative or positive. I think all emotions have value, but I would say it puts us in our more narrowed emotions. So like positive emotions, quote unquote, kind of broaden us and they put us in a more novel, open space. I feel like busyness puts us in a more stressed, narrowed space. And again, anxiety has a purpose, anger has a purpose. All these things are good. But if we get stuck in them, it's when they start to cause problems. But our brain unhappiness, so if we're in a more negative, narrowed space, we're not able to access kind of what the happy brain gives us. So our brain works better, differently, in a positive state rather than a negative, neutral, or stress state. It's kind of the difference between the flight or fight response. So when we're stressed, we're ready to either fight, off a danger, run away, freeze. But it puts us in this very narrow, stuck space where there's a theory called the broaden and build theory by Barbara Fredrickson. She's a positive emotions researcher out of the University of North Carolina. And the idea is that in a broadened space, we seek out resources and we seek out ideas, and that when we're creative, our peripheral vision actually works better in a positive state. We literally see more opportunity around us. And so this idea is that when we're happy and have kind of positive emotions in us, that we seek out resources and people and ideas, and when we're creative and flexible, which leads to more happiness. And it kind of gets us on this upward spiral of positive emotion, she calls it. And so it really does give us this chemical edge to be able to retrieve information better. We're better at problem solving. It turns on the learning centers of our brain. So I always say, whenever you're even in a meeting with someone, starting with like, hey, what's good? Like going around and putting people in a more broadened space actually will be more productive. Same thing in a classroom, same thing with your children. Anytime you're wanting people to get creative, flexible, putting them in a good space is going to help with that process. But if we're stressed and busy and overwhelmed and in that disease of busyness, we can't access this stuff. So it has a myriad effects on the workplace. It's also contagious. So emotions are extremely contagious. If I walked in here today and I'm like, hi guys, how are you? You guys went, whoa. First of all, I'm like, what's going on there? But second, you know, we all meet people where they are. If I'm kind of sad and down here, you come down here. If I come in, I'm like, hey, what's up? How's this going? You know, people are like, then they come up here with you. And so if we're rushed and busy and I don't have time for this and it's contagious in the workplace, and that negativity is contagious and it spreads extremely fast. And we've all been in a good environment and we have all been in an environment that doesn't feel so good. And you can literally feel it in your body. We sync up facial expressions, little micro movements in our face. There's mirror neurons that are going off when we're talking with someone. So in anticipation of what I'm saying, our brains are kind of lighting up in the same place. My mom, I always think back when she was watching my son when he was little, she'd feed him and she'd put the spoon up to his mouth and she'd go like, and she didn't realize she was doing it, but that's how we sync up as humans. Like she's like opening her mouth with him. It was the funniest thing to watch. Should have videotaped it, but so we sync up. So this emotional contagion of everyone being busy and overwhelmed. And you can even see here these clusters of happiness. And this is a really important thing to keep in mind with the people we surround ourselves with, because and also how we carry ourselves, because our emotions are contagious to the people around us and their emotions are contagious to us. So if we want to feel good, we both need to take care of our own energy and surround ourselves with people that have the energy that we want to soak back in. And you can see like the least happiest people in clusters, and literally that like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this phenomenon, but they say like a third level connection has more of an impact on your happiness than $10,000 rates. It's crazy. So you really have to keep in mind both the energy you're putting out and the people's energy that surround you. Obviously, we know there's going to be some effects on our health. If we're rushed, if we're busy, if we're overwhelmed, we have a whole bunch of stress hormones pumping through our body. That flight or fight system that was meant to just avoid actual danger is constantly on when we're in this stress state. All sorts of effects on anything from our fertility to our cardiovascular health, our whole body inflammation, digestive problems, cognitive problems. It's to be inflamed like that with those types of stress chemicals is not good for our health, and we know that. Also clearly having an effect on our relationship. There's all sorts of statistics about loneliness. I do a talk around relationships. I know we were just talking about this earlier, Jess. Relationships are, all the research shows, some of the longest studies on humans in history. There's a study called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, and it followed 2 groups of men in an impoverished neighborhood in Boston and Harvard students. And this was back in, I don't know, the 20s or 30s that it started. The study is still going on. It usually a study will lose their directors. It's now in like its 5th director. And the lessons that they learned from this study as they followed these people that were impoverished and people that had a little more privilege and or at least the ability to get into Harvard and have that type of education. And the #1 takeaway from that study is that relationships are the single biggest correlate to our happiness, our health, our longevity. And what this disease of busyness is threatening is the quality of these relationships and the time that we're able to put in them. UK recently appointed a minister of loneliness because people are so disconnected and lonely. We have 50% less people in our kitchen than we did 10 years ago. Our social capital, which is the number of people that we have around us, is maxing out at 25 as we're getting more insular into our own homes, our own families. And then you get inside the home on your own devices at times. And I don't think we're as present as we used to be in relationships. A lot of quick texts, a lot of, replacing actual conversation with a like or a comment on something. And it's just really putting a strain on relationships. And I was saying that, that happiness being so intimately tied to the quality, not the quantity of relationships. And all these other things that maybe we thought, jobs, fame, money, wealth, prestige, none of that. It was the relationships that are truly the biggest predictor of our happiness. And when we're connected, we release oxytocin. So when you hug somebody, when you have an intimate conversation, when you cuddle, when you pet an animal, when you pray, when you meditate, all of these experiences release oxytocin, the cuddle and connect hormone that tells us everything is safe. And it actually counters the flight or flight stress hormones. So if we're not as connected with people, I think one of the reasons why there's so much anxiety is because we're not able to have this hormone as often and accessible as we have evolved to need. And so I used to hug my daughter when she was younger, and I'd be like, you feel that? That's oxytocin. And so then I'd hug her later, and she'd be like, oxytocin. I was like, all right. I don't know if a lot of like 6-year-olds walk around saying that, but I wanted her to understand that, we're biologically wired to be in connection. And when we are not, we get sick, we hurt, we don't do well, and we need each other. I love this one. 8 hugs a day to feel happier, optimal. So I don't know. I mean, maybe not going around hugging everyone at work, but I don't know. And you can also hug yourself. I know that might sound a little weird, but there's a technique called havening, which is you can calm down your nervous system. There's 3 different ones. So I'll just show you really quickly if you don't have a lot of hugs to access. There's this one where you're crossing, your arms and going down like this. This is another one. And you can do this one under your desk. And it's a technique to kind of get you out of flight or fight. Also, there's people that are certified in this process that can help with trauma and they lead you through something. But if you need a little more self-oxytocin, you can do a little havening. And ultimately, it's having effects on our happiness. We can see these biochemical effects, how it affects our relationship. But I think it also leads us to a very, very dangerous assumption that our happiness somehow lives at the end of getting this to-do list done. That if we could just get all this stuff done, if we could just get this done and get that promotion, or if we could just get the money we need, or if we could just, then we would be happy. And the problem is this is absolutely backwards. And so we think, again, if we work hard, we'll be successful, and that success will bring us happiness. But what if it's really, if we're happy, we're more likely to be successful? And there's research that looked exactly at this. So they did a meta-analysis looking at 225 different studies, over 250,000 participants, and asked the question, are happy people more likely to succeed? And the answer is a resounding yes, in every domain of life. At work, we're more engaged, experience more productivity, more positively evaluated by supervisors, and handle managerial positions better. In relationships, we have more friends, we have more social support, less loneliness, and better marriages. In health and wellness, we're mentally healthier, we take less medication, we have more energy and are more likely to exercise. We know that exercise makes us happier, but we are more likely to exercise if we are happier. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg there. We have stronger immune function. We actually have genetic markers that will turn on. There's a whole field called psychoneuroimmunology looking at how our emotions, our actions actually affect our genetic markers and can turn on and off our gene expression, things that we didn't think we had control over, especially from a mental standpoint. And so it can affect our immune function. And at the end of the day, happier people live longer. So that can't be a case for, getting out of this mindset and into taking care of your own well-being. And happiness is completely subjective. I'm not saying some rah-rah version of like, the world is awesome. It's really what brings you contentedness, what makes you feel good, brings you peace. All of those things are going to affect your health and wellness. And there's actually a formula. I've done this a few times in some of the other talks, so some of you might know this. Check on time here. There's a happiness formula. This is Sonia Lubomirski. She's a researcher out of the University of California, Davis. And she said, if we took a room full of people and we were figuring out the differences in happiness among us, what contributes to those factors? So think of a pie, and in the pie, there's 3 parts. So there's your biology. So why are some of the people happier in that room? Well, some of it's based on their biology. Some of it is circumstances, their money, their marriage, what kind of house they have, and some those kind of circumstantial things. And then voluntary activities, which are our actions and our thoughts. So if you think of a pie, what percentage would you think contributes to these differences among us? So would you say that our biology is, 20%, or circumstances are 40%? Like what percentage to equal 100 would you guess, if you have to guess? Shout out just a guess.
I'm terrible at numbers, so I'm not gonna put percentages on it, but I'm gonna start with voluntary activities, then step point, and smallest.
Okay, so you think it goes
down.
voluntary activity is the highest.
Yeah.
It's going the opposite way. No, yes, you're saying, no, you're saying
Voluntary activities, I think we have.
then biology.
Then biology.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else have a guess? Yeah.
I think it'd be like 40% voluntary activities and then like 30% circumstances and the rest would be biology.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, great guess. Anyone else have a hugely different guess? Okay, I like a little. What is the answer? It's this. Yeah, and so a few things happen every time I show this chart. People are like, oh God, my mom's miserable. And they see like the 50%. Yeah, that happens a lot. But I actually get really excited about this chart. One being this 10%, which is kind of where we think that a lot of this comes from. If I would just be happy when I have that partner. I will just be happy when I get the job I want, when I lose 10 pounds. The genetics is big, and I will say, having 2 children, they came up very different. One came out and she was chill. I was like, oh, I'm such a good parent. I could take this child to like an opera if I wanted to. Then my son came out and I was like, oh, it's genetic. I was like, I just like didn't want to blame it on myself that time. But people come out, we have very different dispositions. And so genetics are big, although as I was talking about, we can have some changes in our epigenetics through things that we do, our actions and our thoughts. But I get super excited about that 40% because that is fully within mostly my control. I understand that there are things that play into our actions and thoughts. Societally, I understand that there are things and even things that we're grown into that affect our actions and thoughts. But if we can really learn to work with that 40%, which is what I consider positive psychology. It's like, how do we work with that 40%? Because that we can do a lot with. And so this really changes the story of I will be happy if, or I will be happy when. If I just do my to-do list and get all this busy work done, I get to finally be happy. Well, not only is it opposite, but it's wrong because there's something called hedonic adaptation, which means we get really used to things. So it's good for us because when bad things happen, we are very adaptive and we can get used to it. Even people that are paralyzed, they say within 2 years, come back to kind of a similar baseline of happiness of where they started. But the problem is these things that we think are going to give us long-term sustained happiness. We're like, oh, I just need a new car. I need a new car. I hate this car. I can't get anywhere. You get the new car, you drive it for a week and you're just like, oh, I got a new car. And we get used to stuff. And what happens is kind of, and I don't have a chart for this one. It's kind of this like we kind of like vibrate around this like happiness set point, and then a good thing happens and then we come back down, and a bad thing happens and then we come back up. And so these things that we put so much energy into having and getting and then realize they don't actually sustain our happiness kind of put us in this fallacy of again, I just get all my stuff done and go and be busy, when actually the things that are gonna make us happy are significantly different, and they come from this 40% of what we think, how we feel, and the things that we do. Okay. I hope that just this awareness at first, and I'm gonna go through, I could do 3 hours on ways to work with the disease of busyness, but I hope at a minimum, this awareness piece really gives you something to think about, both on the end of, oh, if I'm calmer and happier and more peaceful now, I'll actually be able to get the to-do list done. I'll actually enjoy life more, and they're actually the things that are gonna lead to sustained happiness, not those successes at the end of it necessarily. And so we'll kind of pop through some, and again, it's kind of ironic that I have to do this in a condensed time because you all are busy and need to get back to your work days. But we'll go through some different ways that we can work with this. And the first one being that awareness piece. And I love that the root word of aware is where, which is its own tool. So once we're aware, it's its own tool. You have software and underwear and silverware, which means tool. And I think it's a chance to pause, and it's kind of, we've got more language around this now. And I love, like, words create worlds. So even the idea of, like, yeah, like hedonic adaptation. I know you'd never say that term probably, but like, not probably something in your language, but once you're like, oh yeah, I get used to things, and that's not what's gonna sustain me feeling good. I think these words are really important to learn, and any type of awareness really changes the whole landscape of how we experience life. But I'll give you some actual tools besides just being aware. And the first one I like to talk about is unitasking. I remember thinking when my daughter was young and I had her like strapped to me, and I'd be like working and cooking and like sending an email, I'm such a great multitasker, I got this. And I really do think, though, the more I've learned that multitasking is the art of doing twice as much as you should, half as well as you could. Because we're not actually doing multiple things at once. We're just continually shifting. And Dr. Daniel Levinson talks about this idea of continuous attention shifting. And every time you shift your attention from one thing to another, your brain has to engage this like neurochemical switch, which uses up nutrients, it depletes us, and it exhausts us. And so if we think we're just being able to balance everything and handle all this stuff, the more we switch back and forth, the more resources, the more busyness, the more overwhelm, the less cognitive power we can put behind it. So I really recommend, I love a good, if I'm working, I'll do like a 25-minute Pomodoro. Does anyone ever use that technique? Do you do like a 25-minute, you too? Yep. Yeah, so Pomodoros are just taking 25 minutes, turning all your distractions off, and trying to get in as much focused work time as you can. I actually sometimes work on these groups where we'll do Pomodoros together on the computer, and then we'll take a 5-minute break, do another one. The idea being after 25 minutes, your concentration and focus starts to wane. You need to get up and move your body. When we move, our brain creates something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a good one to throw out at a party. BDNF for short. And BDNF acts like fertilizer in our brain. So when we move, we create more BDNF, and it helps create new neurons, new synaptic connections. When we sit, we significantly lose BDNF production. So 20 minutes of sitting, this is why people have walk-in meetings. This is why I say change your mind, move your feet, change your mind. So you want to focus and have these distractions eliminated, but also take breaks to be able to kind of move, get some of those good thoughts going again. So unitasking. Another one, this is one of my favorite tools that I teach. It's a tool for being really present in conversation. It's called active constructive responding. And out of all the stuff I teach, this is maybe one of my favorites. So I'm going to demonstrate it. Does someone like to be my demonstrator? Like I just need to. Who's a bold demonstrator? No, okay. Awesome. Maybe. You can come to you. Yeah, okay. All right. So I'm going to ask you to share some good news with me. And this is a tool you can use to be more present in communication, to slow down. This is great for any type of relationship. Okay. And what's your name? Katie. Katie, okay. Katie, tell me something good. What's going on? Cool. That's passive constructive responding. And what happens a lot is people share good news with us and we're just like, awesome. And then we move on.
Okay.
And so, you know, my kid might come home and say, I did this cool thing at school. I'm like, awesome, bud. And then I just keep doing my thing. Okay, tell me again.
My God, it's fun house.
So I also got a house. Yeah. Oh my God, it's in the, like this really great neighborhood near the Erie Canal. I've been wanting to live there for a really long time.
Cool.
Yeah, it's near Green Lakes and like, oh, I just started decorating and like, yes. So that is it's passive deconstructive when we turn it on ourselves. So often we think that we're trying to make a connection point by turning it on for ourselves, but really I'm taking all of the, and like I'm taking everything away. Okay, tell me again.
My God, it's fun house.
Well, don't get too excited because the housing market is terrible. She's probably got way higher interest rates than she should have had. And who can even afford a house nowadays because they're so expensive? That is actually deconstructive when we're like, don't get too excited when someone shares good news. Okay, and I'm gonna ask you one more time.
God, it's fun house.
Well, that's awesome. Where's the house?
It's a picture.
Okay, yeah, and did she build it or buy it?
She bought it, it's a fixer upper, but it was great, it's her third home with her husband.
And then you'll someday maybe get to go there and and
Good.
maybe babysit.
Maybe babysit someday. Won't that be fun?
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Well, I'd love to see pictures someday. This is active constructive responding. When someone shares good news with us, we're present, we ask questions, we elongate the experience, which brings out more joy in the person sharing the information and me, quite frankly. It makes me feel good because of the contagion of emotion. And we feel closer and more connected to the people that will celebrate our successes than we do for the people that show up during hard times. Because quite frankly, we're uncomfortable when people are uncomfortable. So we do show up pretty much all the time and they're sad. Like, I'm so sorry, what can I do? We want to, like help people feel better. And yes, we need those people in our life, but it's the people that celebrate us that we feel way more connected to. And if someone actually takes the time to listen to your story, ask questions about it, a really easy thing you can say is, say you're like, oh yeah, I just went on vacation. You could say, what was your favorite part of that? And then they're going to recall a really cool memory and it makes you feel connected. So this is a way to slow down, be more present in conversation, build legitimate connection, and also get some of that like good emotion going between the two of you. Very powerful. So one of my favorite tools that I teach. The next idea is how can we find little micro ways to retreat daily? This is me at a place in the Catskills called Menla. It's a Buddhist retreat center, very peaceful, very zen. The Dalai Lama's been there. It's owned by Uma Thurman's dad, who's a Buddhist scholar, and it's stunning and the land just feels very sacred. And when I left, I just remember being like, well, what is it here that I can take back with me? How can I have more of this? I can't go to retreat all the time. Maybe people can't go to retreat at all. How can we retreat daily in our lives? So, one of the speakers that I actually saw at another retreat that I was at, Dr. Viva Ram, she says, you know, how can you just pause 5 times a day and say something as simple as, I am, inhale, at ease, exhale. What would the difference be of just sitting at your desk, pausing and saying, I am, at ease? And even being up here, speaking in front of all of you, trying to make sure I'm getting in all this content. When I stopped and did that, I felt different. And it doesn't take much. It doesn't take a lot to pause, to breathe. We forget to breathe. We don't breathe very well. We breathe from up here. So how often can we just pause to breathe a little better? It can reset your whole nervous system. You are your own pharmacologist by your breath, which is fascinating. If you breathe really fast, you're going to have different chemicals, different hormones going. If you breathe really slow, you are going to activate your parasympathetic nervous system by just breath alone, which is really fascinating. So I'd say, think about your breathing as often as you can. Stop to breathe, fill up the belly. One of my favorite breath counts is a 4-7-8. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. If you have a longer exhale than you do inhale, that is when we activate the parasympathetic nervous system. If you want to wake up and be energized, you'll want to breathe rapidly. That's going to give you a different level of energy. And so there's different types of breath for different types of feelings that you want to achieve. I love this. Is your mind full or are you mindful? The dog's always killing it, right? Don't you always, it's like, wish you could just have a day of the dog. I do, particularly mine, because he just chills a lot. But it's really this like a little bit of detachment and non-judgment. We're constantly in that mind chatter, and a little more presence to just where we are. If I said find 5 blue things in this room, how about find 5 blue things in this room? There are no more blue things in this room than we started with. You were just intentional about where you put your attention. And so if we can be more intentional about where we want our attention, in default, our brain will go to the negative. That's kept us alive. That's how we survive, is this innate negativity bias that we have. If we can pause more often to see what's good, to see what's already happening, to see what magic is right here at any given time, it's going to completely change that mindset. So instead of being in a car, like I need to get to where I gotta go, I'm not there. What can you do in that moment instead? I remember I was stuck in this traffic trying to get to a wedding. I thought I was gonna be late, literally standstill traffic. And I rolled down the window and I could see like a whole ecosystem. There was like butterflies and all this stuff in the rocks. And like, wow, all this stuff is just right here, but I am so in here. And so the more we can slow down and just be present to what's there, the more we start to shift what we see. What we appreciate appreciates. That's kind of the whole message of gratitude, is the more we see, the more it grows. And it's simple, it's free, and we can change that at any given time. I'm also a big fan of meditation. They say if you don't have 5 minutes, you need 15. And meditation can look very different to everyone. Does anyone here have a meditation practice? Couple people? Yeah, it doesn't have to be like a monk on a mountain. I think people get very intimidated by it. And meditation can feel hard. You're like, how is it hard to just sit there and do nothing? And it's in the fact of people are trying to do nothing. You don't have to do nothing in meditation. You can have an active meditation. You can have a walking meditation. You can look at a candle. You can have a mantra like transcendental meditation. The idea though is getting out of all the mind chatter or just recognizing it and coming back to where you want to be. Coming back. And what happens, the more you keep coming back, the more you build that muscle of being able to get out of that chatter and into the space that you want to be in. So meditation is a great technique, and it really has a ton of research around meditation of like the effects it has on even like if the side that your amygdala, where your fight or flight response is, literally changing the shape of your brain, prefrontal cortex, there's like cortical thickening, improvements in executive functioning. So I definitely recommend even a 5-minute meditation at your desk can be really, really change you, or sitting outside for a 10-minute break and just breathing and recognizing what's around. It doesn't have to be fancy. And kind of this idea of like shutting down the tabs in your brain, just doing a full reset. One of my favorite teach though is something called savoring. I know you've heard the term savoring, but savoring is actually a research phenomenon by a guy named Fred Bryant. And he says we don't actually extract all the goodness out of an experience that we could. And this idea that savoring kind of allows us to swish the experience around in your mouth. So this is I'm at a conference in Houston, Texas. This is Martin Seligman, kind of like the author of positive psychology with balloons going. And we had this chocolate savoring station, and this person is just having their own little world over there, eating chocolate slowly, tasting it, feeling it. And it's kind of blending positive or good, some sort of gratitude, good emotion with presence and mindfulness. And so at any given time, you can savor anything. And it's a way to slow down time. It's a way to, I could savor right now, just like, oh, I'm just really feeling it that I get to be here again for the 5th year, and all the people that are here, and it's fall, and just really be present and savor the experience. You can savor what you're eating. I have people eat a little piece of Dove chocolate and I have them eat it for 2 minutes. And they find that they actually enjoy the texture, that there's a message inside the chocolate that they might have just balled up and not saw. And so washing the dishes can be a miserable, I have to get this done to do experience. Or it can be like, this water's warm and I'm happy to have dishes and running water. And I'm not saying every time you do the dishes, it's gonna be like a blissful experience, but you know, we have choice in the way that we, again, the intention of where we put our attention changes the entire landscape of everything. Just like there was no more blue things in here, I just told you to look for them. Did you ever get a new car and everyone's already all of a sudden driving that new car? Like, wow, how is there so many more of those cars? There is not more of those cars, you just recognize. And I know you guys gotta get back, so a few more things. I love to subtract to add. I think no is a full sentence, so you don't need to justify that. Clearly defining what success means to you. Eliminate, outsource. Maybe you hate pulling weeds and there's a kid in your neighborhood that loves it and will do it for $5. What can we take, what about a to-do list? Like or a to-be list? I would say we're human beings, not human doings. Like, what about putting things you love on your to-do list? Like, instead of just a list of like all that I have to do, what if we just insert in there something you want to do? Something you get to do, really changing that language. And boundaries do not exist until you set them. So all these people that keep walking over your boundaries, unless you've stated them and put them out there, they don't actually exist. And I'll leave you with this. Some of the research has found that some of the happiest people, going back to that, what makes us happy, not being these successes at the end of our to-do list, but some of the happiest people devote a great deal of time nurturing their relationships, are comfortable expressing gratitude, they savor life's pleasures and they live in the moment. They practice optimism, which is a thinking skill you can learn. It's not just you're either optimistic or not. When imagining the future, and they have resilience in the face of challenges. None of these things cost anything. None of these things, these are all things that you can do at any given time. You can be grateful in the midst of chaos. There's a great book, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if anyone's ever read that book, but it's even about finding meaning and purpose in the midst of a concentration camp. So all of this stuff is free. All of this stuff is accessible at any time. All of this does not live at the end of your to-do lists. It's within access right now. And just so that's a little bit of the, I was talking about that upward spiral. So the more of that we have, the more of that we get. You know, so that positive motion leads to resources, health, happiness, and it basically ends up like that. And keep in mind that our thoughts become our beliefs, so beliefs repeated over time become our mindset. So if we are constantly in that, I'm busy, I don't have enough time, these become like mental schemas in our heads. And then we have to really carefully pick our thoughts. We're like an audience of one up there. So I always say, pick a good story. And I believe ultimately that the disease of busyness is a mindset, one that we have the power to work with in any second, even this one right now. So thanks for coming out, having some food. Hopefully you savor that, had a little time to slow down. Hope you take more breaths throughout the day and know that this is all easily accessible. So yeah. And also, please come by my space. I do workshops and fun things there and sound healing and so thanks for having me, and I'll be back sometime. I think in October to do another talk. So keep an eye out.
We like her.
There'll be more food. Yes.
And there is still more food, so if you have a coworker you wanna buy off to help, off your to-do list too, maybe bring some food back or for dinner, whatever, but it's gotta go either way, so. Fill up enough bowl if you need to.
Thanks for coming.
Students, about to eat dinner, it's gotta be better than the dining hall. Make another bowl, it'll be good.
Thanks for coming. I will make a little
To go.
Please,
The more people eat it,